Okay, everyone, can you hear me? If you can just let me know in the chat that you can hear me. How's the sound, guys? Can you hear me clearly? Great, perfect. Sound quality good? Excellent, poor? Sounds fine, okay. Okay, guys, we'll just give it another 30 seconds for people to arrive. Make sure you've got pen and paper ready to go. You're going to need it. That's good to hear. Okay, so make sure that you've got a pen and paper. It's really, really important that you've got pen and paper with you so that you can make notes as you go along. Just give everyone about 30 seconds more just in case they haven't managed to get pen and paper ready. Let's see how many people have we got here. Okay, good stuff. Right, let's get going, guys. I think that's enough time. Good stuff. Right, so make sure, guys, if you have any questions along the way, please put them down inside the chat, and then I know as I'm going along that you are getting it and it makes sense. If you're not sure about something, again, just ask and we'll go on from there. Right, so how to write a perfect answer, A-level geography. We're going to start off with just looking at the fundamentals of how to answer questions, okay? So for this, we're going to look at what assessment objectives are, how to break down the question, identify the key elements within the question, understand how to structure your answer, and then receive some guidance on some sample answers, and focus on what to do and what not to do when answering a question. So this is really, really important. So I would definitely get you to just make a note of this and you have an understanding of what's required from you from the exam board. So there are 4 levels of assessment objectives. Okay, in this case, we're just going to focus on 3 for today. So assessment objective 1, you have 2 main components of it. 1, to demonstrate or recall your main facts that you understand and know about, and then to demonstrate your understanding of those facts. Okay, so fact might be a date and time for a particular event, and then why that event was important. Okay, so in summary, you're going to get maybe 2 or 3 mark questions for those. Those are going to be your basic entry-level questions. Rarely will you get a 1-mark question, and if you do, it will be probably around a mathematical thing that you might have to fill in. It might be a table that they've given you and you've got some boxes to fill in. That possibly could come up on physical geography, for example, or even human. And that would be kind of low-level answers that you could provide. But typically 2, 3 marks, 4 marks is kind of what you're looking at for assessment objective 1. Assessment objective 2 is where you apply the key facts and ideas in your answer. So you're applying the relevant information for the question that's being asked. And again, we're going to go on to looking at some examples in a minute. But remember that there is a gray area between assessment objective 2 and 3. So you may be asked to deconstruct the key information down in an assessment objective 2 question, or it might tie into a longer answer question for assessment objective 3. The same applies for making a judgment on the value of the facts and concepts and ideas. So again, it might be an an evaluate question, you might get 8-mark question, which will typically require you to use both assessment objective 2 and 3 levels or level descriptors. Okay, so making sure that you understand the judgment on the value of the key facts, concepts, and ideas. So for level 2, you're looking at applying your understanding, your analysis of it, and your ability to evaluate it in some circumstances. It's likely that for the evaluation part and a top level assessment objective, a fully assessment objective level 3, it might probably be a 12-mark question at the minimum. And in most cases, it will be a 20-mark question. So for a level 3 or assessment objective 3 sort of question, you're going to have to bring all the facts together, concepts and ideas. So typically that will be a 20-mark question most of the time. And for example, if you're doing shaping places, you're going to definitely get a 20-marker. And for your paper 3 exam that you'll do, remember that your very last question that you're going to do on paper 3 in the exam will be a 24-mark question. And that's a holistic question, which is taking into account everything that you've studied in geography, regardless of what you've done at A-level geography. It takes into account what you've done for GCSE and Key Stage 3. And basically it's there for you to demonstrate your ability as a geographer to explain different facts and concepts and ideas that you've developed and how and why you've come to a particular judgment about a specific thing. Now, that's not something that anyone can teach you. You must create and be aware of things that are happening around the world, be aware of current events, be aware of tectonic events, be aware of hurricane events, be aware of weather events around the world that could have an impact on not only your studies and understanding the wider context of what you're studying, but also have an opinion about them and be able to criticize and critically look at information and to come to your own judgment. Don't just accept what you learn in lessons, but also learn to objectively look at it and see whether the information that you've been given is accurate and is it something that is worth considering. So it's really important to understand what the exam board is asking you to do each step of the way, right? So for 2 3-mark questions, remember all you're doing is remembering information, demonstrating it. For level 2 answers, you're probably going to be applying your knowledge, analyzing something in particular. And for top level kind of 12-mark questions, 20-mark questions, you most certainly will be evaluating, looking at the pros and cons of something, and then coming to a judgment on whether one or the other is important or not. On a side note here, I have to say with the 20-mark questions, the evaluation questions, do not sit on the fence. Never sit on the fence with answers. Make sure that you argue from one perspective to the other, because it shows your ability to critically analyze information that's been given to you. And it shows your authority as a geographer that you really understand the material and that you're not just going to sit on the fence and just be kind of unsure about things. If you come across in your writing as being unsure, it's very unlikely that you're going to get very high marks. So for the 20 markers, 12 markers, sometimes you're going to have to make a judgment. And don't be afraid of it. It shows the examiner that you have authority over the material that you have covered and understood. Okay, if everyone can give me a thumbs up that they understand and have got a clear idea of what's expected of them in terms of exam entries and so forth. Great stuff. And remember, guys, you can always come back to review this. I think it automatically gets loaded up onto YouTube, so you can come back and replay this video in case you've missed something. Okay, so assessment objective 1 questions. There are a number of command words. Here are some of them that you will see in the exam. So you might be asked to state something, you might be asked to describe something, you might be asked to outline something, or you might be asked to explain something. So hopefully you all understand what those words mean and their importance. For assessment objective 2 questions and potentially 3, okay, You need to explain or suggest, assess something, evaluate something, discuss something, or argue a perspective to what extent something is important or not important. Now, each one requires you to do something different. Okay, so we're going to focus on, in the examples I give you today, we're going to focus on one particular command word, and in future sessions, we'll look at other examples, for example, assess or evaluate or discuss, and see how we can answer those, because each one of them will require a different style of you demonstrating your understanding and knowledge. So let's have a look at the first question. If you are in year 12, you probably haven't started this topic yet, but it will certainly help you to understand how to answer a good question. So we're going to start with a superpowers question, and then we're going to do a shaping places question. So if you are in year 13, if you are in the upper six, then you can see both examples. You'll need to know both, and hopefully that prepares you well for your mock exams in the future. So first question, explain the extent to which superpowers influence action on global environmental concerns. It's going to let you quickly jot that question down, and then we'll break this question down and try to understand what's going on in it. Just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to go. Okay, good stuff. So here's a breakdown how I see the question. So first of all, trying to understand what is it that I'm being asked to do. So I'm being explain the extent. Okay, so it's an evaluation style question. Superpowers. So first thing I would like to do is probably in the exam, I'll underline these words and I'll put some annotations above them, right? So superpowers, I'm thinking, okay, fine. Potentially, definitely the United States is going to be in there. Potentially China could be in there. The European Union could be a superpower. Depends on which perspective you're looking at it from. Russia could be a superpower when it comes to perhaps a certain aspect of, say, the military, for example, but certainly not a superpower in the world today. China, economically, could be a superpower, but definitely not militarily. So I just write down a few things just to get these things off my head before I start answering the question, because immediately I'm thinking 8 marks, all right, I need to write something which is very detailed and has demonstrates my understanding. So the question here, the critical element of this question is influence action. So how is it that, say, explain the extent to which the United States influences action on, and then I would probably write down or annotate some examples of global environmental concerns. So the US currently is the sole superpower. That's right, yeah. There are some others who have maybe elements of superpowers, but I would argue that probably it is the only one that has the superpower status in the full concept of how we understand what a superpower is. Okay, so if you can just punch in the chat, just let me know what you think could be some global environmental concerns so that I know that you're still with me. Okay, so some examples of global environmental concerns that you're aware of. Yeah, great. So global warming, sea level rise, going to be important. Perhaps you studied or started studying the water security topic. What other things could be of environmental concern? Climate change, definitely. Pollution, linked to climate change. Good. How about deforestation, perhaps? Forest fires, droughts, water supply issues. right? So in the exam, make sure that you just write them down. Just write down a list of them. You don't have to refer to all of them, but getting them down on a piece of paper then allows your mind to just think, okay, which ones or which one do I know the most information about? And that will help you to write a much more logical and clear, well-structured answer. So here's an example of how you might want to break it down. Now, this is what I advise you to do. In the run-up to your exams, starting from today, you don't have to do every single exam question under time conditions. You don't have to do every single exam question without your textbook or without your notes. Use them, all right? And try to come up with structures which then ultimately, when you get under time conditions, you will remember, and then you can apply them very quickly and answer the question. So here's what I would do. I just write down some superpowers that I know of. So for example, I might write down here, United States and China. Let's say for argument's sake. Okay, so what kind of global environmental concerns might they have? Okay, I'll write down whatever it might be, water insecurity, for example, or it might be coal-fired power stations, or emissions from coal-fired power stations, the nitrogen oxides and carbon monoxides and so forth. Okay, so what actions may the United States have taken, right? So they originally ratified the Paris Climate Accords, then they pulled out of it. What else have they agreed to doing? Well, recently they are going to play a prominent role in the upcoming COP conference in Glasgow. So I could write about that maybe potentially. Maybe they've signed a treaty, or they have deliberately or personally within the country themselves, they have put in standards or deadlines for when they want to move to a carbon neutral economy. So anything that comes to your mind, just write down some actions that they've taken. It might be that they've passed a law, maybe they have increased tariffs on certain vehicles, for example, or maybe they've increased duties and so forth. So write down anything that comes to your mind, and then think about how that action, right, links to how are they influencing the actions to be taken. So how are they making sure that not only they are doing it, no, it's not the only, it's a culmination of lots of agreements started from the Kyoto Protocol back in 1997, and it's been, every time it's been improved. So the Paris Climate Accord is just the recent update of an original agreement that started over 20 years ago. So think about how they're influencing those actions to be taken. So what are they doing to make sure that they are addressing those environmental concerns? So how are they influencing action? How are they making other countries or making themselves do the work, right? So think about the different mechanisms of making other countries get involved in the process. Okay, so just give you just 30 seconds or so, just write down your notes as you're going along. And then we'll look at some examples of answers that you potentially could have written. So remember, for this question, you'll need to give a well-reasoned causal explanation on why something is occurring. Okay? And remember, to what extent needs to be answered by the end of the question. So you must be saying to a large extent or to a small extent, it is or it's not. Absolutely, superpowers can definitely influence other superpowers for sure. Yeah. And they do that through various mechanisms. It could be through direct diplomacy, bilateral talks. For example, the United States is going to have a virtual summit with China in the near future. That's an example of superpowers discussing things and then influencing each other to take certain actions in the future. Okay. So remember that your explanation must be presented in logical steps. You need to apply your knowledge and understanding of the issue, and you must address the question through a well-developed and written answer. And you can only really write a well-developed, well-written answer if you have planned out what you're going to write before you start writing it, and previously you have done lots of practice questions, you've practiced your writing skills. It's fundamentally important. It's not just going to suddenly manifest that you're going to write a perfect A grade answer or A star grade answer. You have to practice. Just like an athlete would practice running, you've got to practice writing, and you must do it often, and the more often that you do it, the better you'll get at it. So here's a first answer. I'll give you guys 30 seconds, a minute to read it, have a look through, and then we will have a look at how this answer does. Just a side note, the colors that I've put highlighted in the paragraphs don't correspond with the question itself. I'll update that for next time. Okay, so think about, has this answer referred to specific environmental concerns? Let me know in the chat. Do you think actions have been discussed, or how superpowers are influencing action? So let's have a look at this first of all. So has this answer referred to specific environmental concerns? If you can let me know in the chat what you think. Yeah, for sure. It definitely talked about specific, in the first sentence talked about water supply being an issue, and then give some examples in the next two paragraphs, one from a newly emerging economy and another one from a highly industrialized nation. Okay, good. So does it talk about actions? Does it talk about actions that have been taken to influence, or does it talk about how superpowers are influencing action? Yeah, I think it's a bit debatable, right? When it comes to the actions. And is it clear which superpower, or does it mention superpowers and which ones they are and how they're influencing? Not really, right? So if you look at the first sentence, superpowers have a large influence on global environmental concerns. Okay, which ones are you referring to? One of the biggest examples of this is water supply, right? So what would have been better is to say, well, X country, which would be an example of a superpower, is doing X action, which is having an impact on addressing the issues concerned with water supply. And that would be a better starter, right? So this candidate has started sort of well. He's given an example of something, could be an issue, but has kind of left it hanging a little bit. So as an examiner, you're thinking, well, okay, what am I looking for here? Where can I give you the marks? Remember, you've got to try to speak. Imagine that the examiner doesn't know anything. Remember, you're not talking to your teachers when you're writing. When you go to the exam hall, someone random is going to be marking your work. They have no association with you whatsoever. And you've got to imagine that the person that you're writing for has no knowledge, right? So it's an empty vessel that you're filling full of knowledge and understanding, which you possess. Okay, so you want to demonstrate that in a simple and effective way. Now, the second paragraph, as other countries have become more industrialized, I'm not sure what's that talking about. Countries are using more and more water. Okay, fine, that's a concern. And then starts talking about India. Now, what would have been better is talking about how a superpower has influenced action, perhaps in India. The context of that would have improved this paragraph significantly, right? Because it starts talking about farmers are being supplied with solar power pumps. That's great. That's a solution. And then that's leading to X, Y, and Z. But it's still not addressing the question. The question is asking you how are superpowers influencing the action, right? And I assume from how it's written, that this particular candidate is thinking, well, India is a superpower. And it's not, right? Now, the second paragraph moves on to talking about water management in California, which is based within the superpower. It would have been nice for the candidate to establish the fact that this is what they're talking about and this is what they want to get given the marks for, okay? The best part of this answer so far is the last couple of lines, where it says, despite this happening, scientists in the USA are still skeptical about whether climate change and are unwilling to slow down due to economic losses from their energy businesses. Now that is challenging the status quo, right? So that is a really, really good understanding of the issues involved and a bit more critical evaluation of the challenges of influencing action would see this candidate actually get very high level marks, okay? But the preceding parts have kind of undermined that just a little bit, okay? Definitely demonstrates good knowledge and understanding about certain elements, but just needs to tie it, just refine the answer so it ties in with how superpowers are actually influencing action. Okay, so just a general tip to remember, when you're writing for 6 markers in the exam or 8 markers in the exam, try to use words such as because, despite, some, and but, because it shows that you are critically evaluating the material that you're demonstrating throughout. And it shows your authority. It demonstrates your authority about the issues that are being discussed. Now, that's why I've highlighted this in bright yellow, because it shows that this candidate is looking to improve the quality of what they're writing. Here's another paragraph, just give you 30 seconds to have a quick read of it, and then we'll discuss whether this candidate has referred to specific environmental concerns, actions, or superpowers influencing actions. Just give me a thumbs up when you're ready. Okay, good stuff. Right, so let's read this through together. Okay, the lack of action superpowers have taken alongside other nations in the Paris Agreement and the Treaty on Climate Change signed in 2015, despite signed commitments and pledges to the change, has set poor examples for the rest of the world. Right, so stylistically, starting off, what's this answer doing, stylistically speaking? Do you think the sentence is too short, too long? Is it saying anything? Yeah, it's definitely a very, very long-winded sentence. Does it say much? Yeah, there is a repetitive core point, and it's really nice to see that the candidate has talked about a lack of action, but it's kind of like, okay, well, very early on, but then doesn't qualify it, right? So there's no qualification. So later on in the sentence, it talks about has set poor examples for the rest of the world. Okay, but in between you've talked about action, but you're starting off with a lack of action. So which one is it? Is it action is taking place or not taking place? So it's a little bit muddled, right? And the sentence is definitely too long. Even though it's broken up with some commas in between, it's putting too much in a very short period of time, right? So I would definitely break that down a little bit further and try to focus on one particular thing rather than trying to plaster all sorts of ideas down within a first long sentence. This is very common for A-level candidates to do in the exam. And often why they do it is because they're just trying to start writing everything that they know about a particular idea. And often what will happen is lots of different ideas will come together and it just won't make sense. Now, from an objective point of view, it's really good to see that the candidate has talked about the Paris Agreement. It shows that, okay, you understand that there is some action that's taking place, but the context of how it's delivered is not great. The next sentence, the idea that these nations stress that time is running out has lost its power. Okay, so I'm not sure what this is referring to. If I was just a layperson, didn't know what this question was about, didn't know anything about this topic, I wouldn't understand. Is that referring to the Paris Climate Accords? Is that referring to the fact that today no one's doing anything? What does that mean that nations stressed? I don't know what that means. Do you mean economically, socially, environmentally? Do you mean politically? What's being referred to here? Without an urgency shown for majority of these countries, their influence on action against global environmental concerns is no longer making changes and reducing emissions, but a laissez-faire one. Whatever will happen, and no action needs to be taken against it. So far, has this candidate actually mentioned any global environmental concerns in their answer? If you can let me know in the chat. Has this candidate referred to any global environmental concerns so far? No, and that's the critical part. So we're already in 4 or 5 lines, okay? But still not referencing the question. The basic question is, what are the environmental concerns? In the first sentence, will be established, okay? So if, in terms of marking, I'm thinking, well, where am I giving you the marks, right? And then it finishes with, even if this is not the outlook of those governments, this is how it is perceived, undoubtedly having a negative influence on global action on global environmental concerns, and influence on action on global environmental concerns. Right, so I'm assuming that this is a conclusion of some sort that this candidate is writing. But again, even if this was just, say, the conclusion of a longer piece of work, all right, it has not established any particular global environmental concerns, and it's not really critically analyzed the pros and cons of something. Through the writing, it hasn't demonstrated to me that this candidate has a solid understanding of the issues that are involved. Okay? So again, remember to break the question down before you start answering the question. So important, okay? Look at the question itself. What are the environmental concerns? Water supply, deforestation, drought, whatever it might be, okay? Write them down before you start answering. Then you can focus. Then you're basically signposting for the examiner. Look, this is the action. This is the problem. This is how some superpowers are positively influencing and reducing drought or reducing deforestation, and then do a separate paragraph saying, however, some countries, X or Y, are not doing this, and this is how that they are not being positively impacted to reduce their environmental concerns. Okay? So again, hopefully that's been helpful for you to look at. Again, key thing, guys, often, most candidates to just put all the information on the page, just take that breathing space for 30 seconds, 1 minute, write down a few thoughts, structure your answer before you put your answer down. Now, the one good thing, I suppose, in the previous answer was that they tried to basically use evaluative words such as despite and but if that had been validated with some actual examples, that would certainly have improved the quality of this answer significantly. Okay, so there's a couple more answers here that we can look through, all right, and then we'll come back to, we'll move on to the next topic. We'll look at this one very, very quickly, and then we'll move on to the next question, which is on shaping places. Okay, so let's hear some of your thoughts on this answer. Do you think it has referred to specific environmental concerns? So if you just let me know in the chat box, do you think it's referred to specific environmental concerns? Yeah, definitely not explicitly mentioned, but it has inferred to greenhouse emissions, right? So the assumption is, again, that the examiner knows what you're talking about, right? So you're assuming that the examiner knows that carbon dioxide emissions or methane emissions are the issue here, right? So let's start with the first sentence. A superpower is a country with the ability to project its power and influence anywhere in the world. Okay, really broad statement. Qualify it with an example. You must qualify every single time. You've got to qualify it with an example. Really, really important. They make up the top polluters in the world due to their massive resource demands and influence over other countries' decision-making on all issues. Okay, a totally valid point. Okay, but what would be better is saying China and the United States are the top polluters in the world. Give some facts, give an piece of evidence to prove it. And then say, for example, influencing decision-making in the Paris Climate Accords or influencing in the UN or wherever it might be, okay? And again, what it shows the examiner is that you know the stuff, you're validating the stuff that you understand and you know. They're major innovators in technology and can reduce global environmental concerns and have the ability to distribute the technology. Okay, so now you're talking about solutions, okay? So that solutions are different to actions. Okay. Does everyone understand the difference between the two? If you just let me know what you think the difference between a solution and an action is in the chat. What do you think a difference between a solution and an action is? Correct. Yeah. All right. So, action is doing something, right? And that, whereas a solution is something that might be an idea, okay, but implementing it is a different thing. All right. So here, this candidate starts talking about Russia and greenhouse gas emissions, nanotechnology. Okay, this is interesting information, but it's a little bit muddled. So I would just break this down and start off by talking about how the US are involved in this and how they're influencing Russia rather than the other way around. And then the final paragraph seems to be something separate altogether again. Okay. So again, just make sure that before you start writing an answer, this candidate clearly does have some good knowledge, but it's the application of the knowledge in the context of the question that he or she hasn't done that well. Okay, just conscious of time, guys, so I'm just going to skip on ahead to regenerating places. So if you want to note that question, explain why different groups would have contrasting views about regenerating vacant land in cities, and then we'll go through this together. Okay, so let's break this down. So again, this is an assessment objective 2 sort of question, and you're going to have to come up with a well-reasoned causal explanation for why something is occurring or not. Here's some of the things that I would highlight, right? So I'd make sure I'd underline and explain why. Different groups, I'll just write down some examples of some different groups that would be involved, different stakeholders. And then I'd write down, just bullet points, some contrasting views on the side of the piece of paper, and then write down some examples of some vacant land in cities, right? So you should all have an awareness of what this could be. So for example, different groups might include local people. It might include the local council. It might be the national government, okay? It might be an environmental group, all right? Contrasting views, well, depending on which one you're looking at, they're going to have certain views, so you might want to annotate those down very quickly. And then vacant land in cities, depending on which city you're from or town you're from, you can use examples which are relevant to you. So vacant land in London, probably you would talk about Docklands back in the 80s and how that was regenerated, or potentially you could talk about the Olympic sites and how they were regenerated as well. So plenty of ideas. Now, again, the key thing is jot bullet points down for 30 seconds to 1 minute. You would just write those bullet points down on the piece of paper. Get it down on the piece of paper. Get this information down because it frees your mind to then structure that information in a fluid and straightforward manner. Okay? From now on, annotate everything, annotate every question that you do. Give yourself 30 seconds to do it. You have time to be able to do that. Now, for those of you who are practicing as you're going along, break it down further. Spend that a little bit longer and break it down. This will help you with your revision as well. Okay? So, for example, you could write down the different groups that are involved. You can write down the local actors, the local council members. It might be local residents. It might be national government. It might be an environmental group. It might be a business. Okay? Whatever it is, just make a list of those different groups that you're aware of, and then write down some viewpoints, just very quickly, right? So again, don't overthink this. Keep it simple, right? Write down a view. It might be a positive view or it might be a negative view. If you know more than one, then write them down. Okay, and if you don't remember them, go to textbook, get your textbook out, get your notes out, look at the different examples and make some notes. And at the same time, not only are you revising, you're also applying it in the context of a question. And then think about why is it that they might have that particular point of view? Why would they be for or against redevelopment of that site? So for example, if you're looking at the Olympic sites, you could argue that a lot of local businesses probably were very upset about having to be forcibly removed from the area. They'd been based in that area for over 50 years in some cases. It was known for its carpentry, for example. It was known for its small little businesses, industrial cores. So, why would they be upset? Think about the reasoning behind that. Think about why local residents may have been upset about the redevelopment. What would that have done for them, and what has it done for them as we know of today since regeneration has occurred? Okay, so again, just write these key points down. Don't just go straight into the answer and start writing it down. Break it down, break it down. Every time you get a question, break it down into its constituent parts, and then suddenly a longer question becomes a lot more easier for you to manage and control. So again, remember, like last time for the previous question, you need to explain your answer in logical steps. You need to apply your knowledge and understanding, and you must address this question clearly through a well-developed and well-written answer. If you do this consistently, every single time, you're going to write better and better. And like I said previously, if you don't do any wider reading, if you don't read newspaper articles, for example, or magazine articles, which are related to your topics in geography, then how are you going to know how to write well, right? You have to imitate and you have to look at other people's written work to be able to improve your own written work, okay? And that can only happen through you reading and then applying what you've read in the context of what you're doing. So let's have a look at this answer here, all right? I'll let you have a read of it, and then we will break this down into its constituent parts. Okay, if you just let me know if you let me know in the chat whether you've read it. Okay, so let's have a look at the breakdown. So the first paragraph, regardless of the outcome, and contrasting views could turn hostile. Okay, is this referring to the question? If you can let me know in the chat. Is this referring to the question? The first sentence, is this first sentence referring to question? It's not, is it? Right? The question is not asking about winners and losers. It's asking about contrasting views, just viewpoints, right? So you just want to say there will be, depending on what group you are. So you might want to mention in the first sentence the different stakeholders and the fact that they're going to have very different views. And then that sets the context for what you're going to write in the paragraphs beneath. Okay? So establish the key elements that you're going to discuss. for the examiner to look at. All right, so you're telling the examiner, look, this is where I want you to give me the marks, and then start focusing on the next few paragraphs when you carry on writing. Okay, so next bit. Vacant land has potential for different opportunities. Okay, not sure what you mean by opportunities. Are they economic, social, environmental, political? What you're referring to? The locals would want to use the space to benefit themselves, and whether it be for consumption aspect. Does anyone know what that means? Okay, what does it mean by consumption aspect? Are you referring to the economy? Are you talking about a local economy? Are you talking about people using it for social wealth, social leisure facilities, for example? Maybe there's a park. Is that what you mean by consumption? Furthermore, the stakeholders would have had different experiences of the area which could contribute, full stop. Contribute to what? So far, I've not read anywhere where it tells me what that viewpoint is on a context or a particular reason for why they would want a vacant land to be regenerated or not. Right? Yeah, well, they've mentioned the locals as being stakeholders, so that's perfectly fine. But then they haven't really elaborated on why they have a particular viewpoint about something. So I'm assuming that what this candidate is trying to say is that the locals would want to regenerate the area because it means that they may have access to facilities that maybe they didn't have access to before. Maybe they're recreational facilities, or maybe they are business opportunities. Maybe it's just they need some shops, like a supermarket or something that they can go to, right? They might want to have closer distance to it. But they haven't actually said that in the answer. And then it talks about, furthermore, stakeholders would have had different experiences of the area which would contribute. So that's left it to imagination, right? So the stakeholders would have different experiences. So positive experiences or bad experiences? Which one are you referring to? And do you mean by contribute, do you mean that's what's influencing whether they are for it or against vacant land being regenerated, right? So again, if this was your own teacher marking this question, right, they would know kind of what you're trying to say, right? But the examiner won't give you that benefit of the doubt. Okay, so remember, key thing is you're trying to teach, or you're trying to fill an empty vessel. Demonstrate to the examiner that you know what you're talking about, and the only way you can do that is being specific and you're referring to specific examples. Let's have a look at the third paragraph. There may be some form of attachment to an area, whereas other groups may dislike the use of the vacant land. Okay, if housing or education were to improve, then it would attract more people. So the area which increases competition and therefore more difficult for locals to have affordable life and stay there. Okay, so this bit here is establishing some of the issues with regenerating land, but it's not saying which stakeholder is going to be affected by it the most. It's not saying, okay, the locals are going to be affected by it the most. They are the ones that are going to be the most upset. Okay. So it talks about it's more difficult for locals to have an affordable life, but it's not talking about the fact that they are going to be upset in that process. Okay, what would have been better to say would be, you know, it's great for businesses because it gives them an opportunity to make profits. It also regenerates the land. It may create construction opportunities for locals so they can be employed in that industry. That would be a better way of kind of establishing this paragraph than just talking about some vague concepts. Okay, these are valid concepts, but they're not answering the question very well. There is a potential for a shift to middle upper class in the areas. Furthermore, the local council will benefit as they will receive revenue from the new residents. Well, they would have received revenue from the old residents, from council tax, and therefore the area is able to improve the local area further, attracting new people. I'm assuming, again, what it's referring to is displacement of working class populations with more affluent populations. But again, it doesn't demonstrate the contrasting views. It's not saying the council, it just says the council will benefit. It doesn't say the council is, doesn't say its viewpoint, okay? Lastly, regeneration can improve the local area cleanliness and even alter the greenness of an area, which will improve views of third parties such as sustainability groups. Okay, that's a valid point. But what does it mean by cleanliness and what does it mean by greenness, right? Because even the definitions of those may influence whether a stakeholder is happy with it or not. Okay, so again, this is again a typical way which a candidate will probably end up writing an answer, and often it's because they know so much, they know enough material, but they're just trying to very quickly write things down, but they're not really thinking about what they're writing down. Okay, so take the time to reflect. I would go away and slow down, annotate the question, as I've said time and time and again, all right? Annotate the question, write down the key points. If you don't have the knowledge about it, don't worry about it. Go to your textbook, go to your notes, get them out, write them down, because concerted, focused effort and trying to find the right materials for the question and writing a well-structured answer over a long period of time will significantly improve the quality of what you write, okay? So how can I improve my writing? First of all, practice writing. I've said this time and again. For short answer questions at A-level, you need to be writing about 100 words, okay? So for you, it will be different depending on your handwriting size and so forth. Make sure that you read newspaper articles and learn how journalists write. It's so important. You have access to fabulous written work out there, whether it's the Financial Times or the Times or the Guardian, whatever you're reading, read good quality newspapers and just maybe take out a paragraph from a relevant piece of material. It might be about globalization. It might be about superpower conflict. Take out a paragraph that you've read and think about, well, how have they structured this? What words have they used, right? Typically, you'll find for 6-mark questions, words such as because, despite, some, but, you'll find them in those journalistic articles that are being published every single day, okay? And all you have to do is try to replicate that. And again, practice is what's going to help you to do that. Write in the third person. So, for example, you might write, the most critical factor appears to be, da, da, da. Note here that I didn't say the most critical factor is. A lot of candidates will start an essay, say for an evaluation question or whatever it might be, and they might start with the most important I totally agree with this statement because. And what you're doing is you're not giving the examiner the opportunity to learn that you understand the different viewpoints, right? And it actually undermines you as a writer because it shows that actually you're very narrow-minded about a particular thing, okay? So make sure that you leave a little bit of the door open so that you can look at it from the other side. Write as if the person reading your answer gets a sense that you're speaking with authority, all right? It's so important. You only can do that by using the right keywords because, despite, some, but, okay? Appears to be, all right? To a small extent, to a large extent, all right? Use those keywords consistently throughout your answer. Pepper these in, right? And if it helps, before you start writing the exam, an example, just write these words down so that you can refer back to them, okay? You can remember these. These are not very hard words to forget. So a couple of questions for you to review. So for those of you who've not done the 8 markers and the 6 marker that I've gone through today, you can note those down and attempt doing those questions for next time. So we'll do this session again next week. It might be a slightly altered time. We'll have to see how we go. I will post it as early as possible this week. So write down your note, the questions above. Write down your answers to it. Use your textbook. Use your notes if you need to. Okay, no one's trying to catch you out. Number 3, go back and watch the relevant parts of this video. So this will be posted online for you. Go back and review what I've talked about, okay? See how you can improve your written work further. Look at those examples again. Go, okay, fine, that's what I need to change. I'm writing a bit like that. Maybe I should avoid doing that. That's what Sir said, so forth. You need to write this question down, everyone. All right. So explain how tension can increase between countries over the acquisition of physical resources such as oil. Okay. So a 6-mark question for you to have a look at. We will also look at a shaping places question again next week. So be prepared for that too. I'll just give you 30 seconds to get that down, and then we're going to move on. Okay. Q&A. Anyone got any questions? Just let me know in chat. Our next exam practice session will be this time next week. I will post the times up for you in advance so you know what's going on. Okay, great stuff, guys. I hope you found that useful. Please do leave some comments in the video, and I look forward to catching up with you next week. I'll let you know the shaping places question. Okay, guys. Have a lovely evening. You're very welcome, everyone. Take care.